What if I told you millions of Christians believe turmoil in the Middle East is necessary for the second coming of Christ? And strangely, or rather disturbingly, a disturbing Japanese anime accidentally explains why. So, the anime in question is Urotsuki Doji, and it is infamous, it is grotesque, and it is controversial. It is bodily in its mythology, which is incredibly interesting, and it concerns a prophecy about three different worlds merging. So, within the mythology of Urotsuki Doji, the mythology consists of this. We have the human world, the demon world, and what's known as the animal world, which we sort of get into a little later. And the idea is that a coming messiah, known as the Chojin, who is kind of like a super being, will unite the three worlds. So basically, everyone thinks the prophecy will bring salvation, but when it happens, it brings transformation and chaos. The prophecy doesn't save the world, it melts it. So, with regards to the prophecy it had, we could sort of think of it like a machine. So, prophecy, when you think about it, it can become a system that organizes people. And so, let me sort of bring in mind the great philosopher Martin Gilles Deleuze. So basically, Martin Deleuze, in his sort of thought and his writings, uh, talks about many different sort of things, and they touch on belief, politics, money, institutions, and so on and so forth. So, what Martin Deleuze talks about is he talks about this thing called assemblage, which is his word for what a state is. A state is not a single unified actor, let alone a moral actor, at least in the words of Martin Deleuze, but rather states consist of multiple overlapping and even sometimes conflicting parties. This is hence his term assemblage, or as we would say in English, assemblage, because that's essentially what they are. They serve as an assemblage of different overlapping and sometimes contradicting intentions or desires, parties, and so on and so forth. And that is what a state is, functionally speaking, according to Martin Deleuze. And so when we take into account that we have certain groups that believe prophecy with the Bible to be a participatory act, meaning that they have to actively engage with the text. They need to bring about the reality of the apocalypse. Then prophecy stops being just a prediction. It becomes a machine in the way that Martin Deleuze talks about. So we can sort of transition to the real world, so to speak, sort of we already were in the real world. So basically, you have Christian Zionism. Because in the anime that I talked about, you have people actively trying to bring about the birth of the Chojin. So, skip over to the real world. We have Christian Zionism. And basically, it is this sort of bizarre belief system that follows this. Israel must exist, okay? Israel needs to exist in terms of reality. And events in the Middle East are tied to prophecy, and conflict precedes Christ's return. So the key idea for many believers, these sort of Christian Zionist types, who are rather strange when you think about it, because many of them are sort of more pro-Zionist than a lot of Jews are, and they have this sort of intense loyalty to Israel and to the Jews. But I would argue that it's not the Jew himself, but the figure of the Jew they are loyal to, because they also want to convert them all to Christianity. So it's a very interesting, very bizarre sort of belief system. And so for many believers, Middle East conflict equals a sign prophecy is unfolding. So in other words, war becomes proof that prophecy or the prophecy is working. So getting back to the assemblage. So basically the assemblage, again similar to with the Chojin, you have sort of overlapping things, right, that Deleuze talks about. And these are not necessarily physical entities either. So if we look at, say, the body, you have the skeleton, which you could argue is scripture. You have politics and geopolitics, so that's muscles. You have media, so that's the nervous system. And of course, you have prophecy, which you could liken to heartbeat. And so examples of physical agents, actual agents, as part of this assemblage would be televangelists, lobbying groups, pilgrimage tourism, fundraising, and the US-Israel political alliance. So the key idea is this is no longer just religion, it's a geopolitical apparatus. Now here comes the paradox. If millions believe a war must happen, they may unintentionally help create it. And so examples being political pressure, farming conflicts as biblical, framing, conflicts as biblical, and diplomatic support and public opinion. So basically the idea is that the prophecy begins to fulfill itself. Now, that's sort of where it comes in with the Chojin, because in the beginning, with the creature attempting to hunt down the Chojin, he ends up bringing forth the Messiah, the Chojin, in question. So the reality of the situation is that in the modern world we have nuclear weapons, we have regional war risk, global alliances, and ecological collapse. And so basically a real Armageddon would not resemble the sermons. So, what does all this sort of have to do with Martha Deleuze? And so, this is where I sort of get back to Martha Gilles Deleuze, and basically in drawing upon Martha Jacques Lacan, who talks about desire sort of being this thing that constantly drives the human animal, and that what we desire changes. Deleuze, Martha Deleuze would argue that desire produces systems, and systems produce events. And so the key insight is beliefs don't just interpret the world, they actually help build it. Isn't that interesting? So we could use the Second Temple as an example. Not only was there a belief in Yahweh, but the belief in Yahweh led to building Yahweh a physical home, a place where Yahweh could live physically in the Holy of Holies. And so that is an example of how beliefs can actually shape reality and vice versa. And this is sort of Deleuzian type thinking. And so prophecy organizes desire in the Lacanian or specifically Deleuzian sense of the word. So in Uratsuki Doji, the Chojin appears, but world order collapses, categories dissolve, and chaos emerges. It's actually rather graphic the way that it happens. It's sort of like this onslaught of just fire and hell and so on and so forth. And so the key insight here is that the prophecy was true, but the world that believed it could not survive it. And I think that's an important point to be making here. So what am I sort of getting at? What I'm getting at is basically that Christian Zionists are often sincere believers, not necessarily that they are sort of the result of manipulation. Millions believe it, in fact. Politics forms around belief. So belief becomes a historical force. So if prophecy machines succeed, what happens? So basically, we have a situation where, because they're mobilizing and pouring millions and billions of dollars into making this happen, the prophecy may very well get fulfilled. Greater Israel may be established, the Temple of Solomon may get restored, and in so doing, civilization will be either transformed or destroyed. And that is my point, is that we need to be very careful going forward, because you might get exactly what you want, and sometimes it's not always a good thing. The creature history gives birth to may not resemble the salvation people imagined. And so that is my point, is when it comes to Uratsugi Doji, is when they realized that the foreseen Messiah was not bringing the sort of paradise that they thought, but they ended up getting anyway. This is the danger of Christian Zionism today. The unbelievable power that Israel enjoys in Washington is not because of some sort of anti-Semitic Jewish conspiracy theory. Rather, the reason is because of this enormous, powerful force known as Christian Zionism, pouring millions of dollars and votes and so on and so forth into making this happen. And that is the danger. The danger is not that they are wrong. The danger is that they might very well be right, meaning they might get everything that they want: a restored Greater Israel, a restored Third Temple of Solomon, and a Third World War that dissolves entire nations, depopulates large swaths of the planet, and brings about great destruction. But that is exactly why what they are doing is dangerous. And I believe that if they were to be given everything that they wanted, like the cult in the anime that I mentioned, who sort of longed for the coming of the Chojin, they themselves will realize that they did not want to pay the price that they must pay in order for their version of Jesus to return. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.